In the world of weird Epcot attractions, not everything needs to be as cut and dry as a show about singing food or French robots. Sometimes the strange subtlety of an otherwise normal attraction can make it just that much more odd upon closer inspection. One such example being the park's original version of a current favorite. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Keep Epcot Weird, a video series focusing on the stranger and more obscure aspects of Epcot. In this video, it's all about one of the park's greatest thrill rides ever, Test Track, an attraction that took you on a fast-paced tour of a vehicle proving ground, all while the car you were in was also being tested at the same time. Yeah, that sounds safe, right? Of course, the ride as we know it today has a completely different theme than it originally did. So with this episode, we'll be exploring that first version, and everything that was weird about it. But before we jump into all that, let's start out with the more boring history of the ride that preceded it. Aw, come on man, I hate history. In the days before Test Track, you would instead find another ride inside its circular building, called the World of Motion. Much like other park favorites, Horizons and Spaceship Earth, the World of Motion was an Omnimover dark ride that took you through the past, present, and assumed future of transportation through different little humorous vignettes. This attraction, part of the park's larger transportation pavilion, was sponsored by General Motors. And while they had originally signed on with Disney prior to the park's opening to fund the actual construction of the attraction, they were reluctant to re-sign for another 10 years of sponsorship in 1992. Given the fact that the somewhat dated World of Motion just wasn't getting people interested in GM the same way it did in the early 80s. In order for them to continue funding the pavilion, Disney would need to create a new attraction for it to help better represent the company. And what they came up with was a ride that let you experience firsthand how GM tested their cars in real life, putting you right in the middle of the action as your vehicle experienced high speeds, braking tests, and a few other surprises, essentially turning the rider into a live test dummy. And if there's one thing that I learned from those old seatbelt safety PSAs, it was that you can learn a lot from a dummy.
You could learn a lot from a dummy. Buckle your safety belt.
You see, my point exactly. So with that plan in mind, World of Motion was closed in early 1996. Its host building subsequently gutted as the all-new Test Track was installed in its place. And, following a lengthy development and construction process spanning about 3 years, the new ride was officially opened in March of 1999.
Compared to other activities, riding Test Track leads to a decidedly prominent increase in endorphin manufacture in the basal ganglia. In other words, Test Track rocks!
Alright dude, I still think I got it under control though.
Brace yourself.
Oh my god, what's happening? Somebody get the volume, turn this down, it's too much.
The ultimate automotive experience.
Whew. Alright everybody, false alarm, just a little bit of 90s graphics, we've seen this before, everything's fine.
Test Track is the ultimate automotive experience. This is where you'll see how General Motors, the world's largest automaker, tests its cars.
Even though a lot of people like to write off Test Track as just another big dumb thrill ride that replaced an old Epcot pavilion, I'd argue that it actually still fit the park's educational theme quite nicely. Not only was it entertaining from a ride standpoint by offering enough thrills to get people interested, but it also took that opportunity to inform its riders about real-life safety testing.
Test Track started as a dream to combine automotive testing, Autobahn excitement, and pure, outrageous fun. And that's why Test Track is the newest attraction at Epcot, where the wonders of the real world come together with fun and imagination.
All things considered, Test Track still seems like an attraction that was designed around Epcot's original entertain and educate philosophy, which I definitely give them a lot of credit for. But as much as I love this attraction and how it tried to update the park's theme in an interesting way, you can't deny that its presence and actual execution was a little weird, even for 90s Epcot. Just by walking up to the front of the building, you can already tell this attraction is very much different than the rest of Future World. Everything from its new 3-story towering metal canopy to the vibrant yellow and black checkerboard patterns all over it give you a pretty clear impression of its more industrial theme, as the attraction now takes place inside a vehicle testing warehouse, an idea that was definitely carried over into the new queue. as you'll find that its entire first floor was now home to a labyrinth of video screens, disassembled vehicles, and tons of test dummies. This new queue is probably one of the most densely themed areas in the entire park. I mean, every single inch has got so much going on. It's the best kind of sensory overload. All kinds of loud tests happening on all sides, spinning wheels, stripped down engines, and strangely enough, you'd also pass through one of those noise-canceling anechoic chambers. I guess a quick little reprieve before you go get your ears blown out in the rest of the line. Another weird running theme in the queue that I really don't understand was the absolute brutalization of test dummies. You got this poor guy getting slammed in the chest with a hammer all day, a severed head dropping directly into a pole over and over, random body parts in cages. It's a little graphic, guys, okay? We're supposed to be learning a lot from the dummies, not torturing them.
You could learn a lot from a dummy. Buckle your safety belt.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. After making your way through the queue, you'll find yourself inside a briefing room to watch an introductory pre-show and get a quick rundown on the ride ahead.
Thanks. Hi everybody, welcome to the test track. My name is Bill McKim, I'm up here in the controls center. In just a couple of minutes you're going to be out there on that track. But first let's put together your test schedule. These are the same kinds of tests that are run at GM test facilities all over the world.
And speaking of test facilities, you can also spot a few photos of GM's Milford Proving Grounds if you look around the room, the very same place that Test Track was based on. Even more interesting is that Imagineers actually first visited the grounds back in the late 70s, while still trying to come up with ideas for the World of Motion. So it's pretty ironic that it would also inspire the attraction that replaced it. Going back to the pre-show, it also broke down how some of these tests are used to gauge how reliable new vehicles are. Once again tying into the educational aspect of the attraction, and also how it related back to real life.
Now, if this whole routine seems a bit extreme, you're absolutely right. That's what a test track is all about. The cars you drive at home are made up of over 15,000 different parts, and every one of them has to pass the test under very extreme conditions before we ever let it off that test track and out onto the road. Now, as you can imagine, safety is a big concern of ours, so we're going to insist that you buckle up your safety belt securely.
I think I've heard that somewhere before. I just can't for the life of me figure out where.
You could learn a lot from a dummy. Buckle your safety belt.
Oh, yeah, there it is. How could I forget? Once you're through the pre-show, it's only a couple more switchbacks before boarding your vehicle and getting this test ride started. Right off the bat, the immediate test you come across is the seatbelt test, which is basically just a clever way to turn a basic safety precaution into part of the experience. Next up is the hill climb, which takes you from the first floor all the way up to the very top of the building.
The torque and transmission load data are looking good.
Great, let's proceed to the rough road tests.
You got it.
From there, you come back down that same ramp while going over different types of rough terrain to test the vehicle's suspension and maybe just jostle you around for the fun of it. After that comes the braking test, where they first take the vehicle up to a high speed and try and stop you without anti-lock brakes.
Hold on. Braking now.
Obviously to some very rough results. Then, they set you up for another straightaway, but this time with the anti-lock brakes, and a much smoother stoppage.
Okay, let's try it again, this time with the anti-lock brakes.
ABS reactivated. Braking.
All right, that's the way it ought to be. You see how ABS lets you keep control of the vehicle while braking?
Funny enough, when the ride was first open, anti-lock brakes were really just starting to become as commonplace as they are now. So even just that small bit of the attraction could still be considered informative at the time. From there, we come to one of my favorite tests in the whole ride, the environmental chambers.
Let's demonstrate some extreme test conditions.
In these rooms, you'd experience both extremes of the hot and cold in their respective chambers, coupled with actual temperature effects to seal the deal. The third chamber was for testing corrosion on the vehicle itself, and how well it would hold up against the elements. Now might be a good time to point out that every single test we've been through this far is actually performed at GM test facilities. The different chambers, the braking tests, hill climb, even the Belgian blocks we went over at the beginning were replicas of the real thing. It just goes to show the level of authenticity they went for with Test Track. not just copping out and putting a bunch of stuff in there for the sake of making a fun ride. It was all real. After the chambers, we finally get to one of the more thrilling portions of the ride, the handling test.
Clear for track course A.
All right, let's pick up the pace.
Where you'd go through a series of bends, turns, and dips at different speeds, slowly accelerating as the test progressed, which was all well and good up until the lights cut and a giant semi-truck is coming right at you. Oh my god, look out! I'm still not entirely sure why an 18-wheeler was going the wrong way on a closed course, but hey, these things happen, okay? You guys gotta be ready for surprises. Anyway, the good news is that our next test is pretty straightforward. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with the barrier test, right? Now this is where buckling that safety belt really starts to pay off.
All personnel, clear the track. Barrier test in progress.
Hang on tight.
Oh, sorry. My bad, guys. It looks like we were actually lined up for the speed test. This is where your vehicle ramps all the way up to its top speed, hitting up to 65 miles per hour as it makes bank turns all around the back and front of the building. And while it might not seem like a lot compared to how fast some of you speed demons try and get to work every day, 65 is a totally different experience with the top down while you're at a 50-degree angle and in a vehicle that you don't have control over. Little more thrilling than the daily commute. Once the speed test concluded, you'd enter back into the building through a thermal imaging chamber, just to make sure you didn't break anything out there. On the vehicle, that is, not you. We're not worried about that. And from there, it's back to the load area where the ride wraps up and you disembark. Much like the other pavilions of Future World, you'd also get a quick post-show before exiting the building, which in Test Track's case was something called the Assembly Experience, a sort of living replica of a vehicle assembly line, complete with a die press for creating different car parts and robotic arms for assembling them. You see, what did I tell you guys? I knew there were going to be more robot arms in this series, you didn't believe me. And on top of that, the post-show was also home to some of the attraction's original characters, a couple of crash test dummies that didn't look totally terrifying. Yeah, just kidding of course. Good luck sleeping tonight, everyone. Even still, I almost kind of like these guys as just a weird set of characters for the attraction. They definitely fit. And I gotta assume they were at least somewhat based on Vince and Larry from the seatbelt PSAs they were still airing on TV at the time.
After this joyride, I'm out of the crash dummy business for good.
But Vince, it's a great job. Heck, they'd have to pry me away from it.
Anybody home? Larry, they do pry you away from it.
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe I'm just bringing that up so I can do the buckle your safety belt thing again. Well, it looks like you're never gonna know why.
You could learn a lot from a dummy. Buckle your safety belt.
Alright, for real, that's the last time with that joke. Along with the assembly experience, they also had a few displays talking about stuff like alternative fuel sources for vehicles in the future. Once again, kinda trying to retain that old Epcot feel. And if this whole experience really inspired you, you could always just go ahead and pick up a brand new vehicle right there in the building. I mean, a brand new truck might seem like an expensive souvenir, but it's probably on par price-wise with the rest of Disney's gift shop, so why not? Despite being as strained as it was, Test Track still managed to quickly become a park favorite when it first opened. With its unique blend of thrills, detailed theming, and just straight up Epcot-y weirdness, the attraction ended up being one of the most popular ones there. But, as we all know, when it comes to Disney, not all good things can last, which was exactly the case with Test Track when Disney announced that it'd be undergoing a major retheme in 2012. Considering GM's sponsorship contract on the pavilion was reaching its renewal phase, and the original ride inside it wasn't feeling as fresh as it once had, Disney began planning a way to update the pre-existing attraction without starting from scratch. This new version of the ride, still reusing the same track layout, ride system, and name as before, was said to be more so centered around vehicle design, rather than vehicle testing like before. And when General Motors signed off on the idea and continued their sponsorship of the attraction, they did so under their Chevrolet division, likely because the GM brand wasn't very popular at the time. Yeah, you probably don't want people thinking you dropped a couple million on a ride after going bankrupt. Not a very good look. Either way, Test Track ended up closing for its refurbishment in April of 2012, only a couple months after the initial announcement. But If you thought that was fast, you'd be even more surprised to know that it was back up and running by December of that same year. And a timetable like that is always the mark of a quality attraction. For the sake of summing up this whole new version a little bit more concisely, I want you to try and imagine the original test track, but without any of the eccentricities that made it unique. Basically strip away all the fun theming and replace it with one of the most uninspired backdrops in the park, and you pretty much got this new ride. For example, outside the building, they took away the original gigantic banners with artwork on them from the ride, in favor of just putting up a giant T. They also switched out the old eye-catching yellow and black patterns with a basic blue and silver color scheme. Inside the queue, the old maze of different tests and fun little details to look at are all gone as well. Now the whole room just looks like some kind of stylized car dealership. And it's changes like those that are really emblematic of the new test track experience. Everything that was unique about the ride has been replaced by something much more boring. And sure, the new design is really sleek and futuristic looking, but it's at the cost of feeling special. The appeal of that old warehouse queue wasn't that it looked good, it was that it felt like it actually had some character. This new queue still takes up most of the same space as the old one, the only difference being that a large portion of it is now dedicated to something called the Design Studio. Unlike the original ride, this version replaced the traditional stand in a room and watch a video kind of pre-show with an interactive experience, letting you custom build a test vehicle, design its appearance and features, and then get to see how it performs on the ride ahead. For me at least, this is one of the few redeeming aspects of the new attraction. And had it been given better context and presentation, you can definitely see it being part of a more informational ride experience, considering a lot of concept cars nowadays are designed digitally. But I'm sure this whole idea was just the result of Disney's obsession with interactivity in their queues nowadays. Guys, we can go 5 minutes in line without touching something, I promise. As far as the new ride itself goes, it's basically the exact same thing that we just went over, only now with a bunch of new lighting and projection effects to kinda enhance every scene and give it a more futuristic, simulation-esque feel, as you are supposed to be on a sim track, testing the digital design that you just created. And while this new look does lend itself to a visually impressive attraction, I think it still lacks the same sense of story and scene design that the original did. Just compare the old environmental chambers with what they turned into for the new ride. Where you initially had these really neat, detailed rooms with a clear purpose and fun little effect where you would get hot and cold, this version just strips them down to a couple of rooms with projected laser beams and mirrors. I'm sorry, but you can't tell me that's an upgrade in terms of theming. It's boring and doesn't make the experience any more memorable. One of the only aspects of the ride that still shines through the retheme is the ride system. The old handling test portion is just as much fun as it was before, because they really couldn't mess with it. And the same goes for the speed test. There's no redesigning something that was always strictly there for the thrill element. Well, with the exception of the barrier test part, which is now just a couple of logos that light up and a room with some purple arches in it. Not as much fun as the wall fake-out they used to have, but I digress. You guys can kinda get the idea behind this new version. The post-show area also saw some major changes too, including the total removal of the original assembly experience section, now switching it out with some different little racing games, and a place to see whose custom vehicle held up better at all the different tests. And of course, it wouldn't be the transportation pavilion if they didn't try and sell you a car on the way out. Which is good, you know, I think I might impulse buy a Camaro one of these days. In terms of Test Track's future, most people assumed the attraction, or at least this version of it, doesn't really have too much longer. For starters, it's already been around for 7 years now, so assuming it lasts as long as the original did, we're still about halfway through its lifetime. On top of that, the fact that its design is so derivative of the Tron aesthetic might render the current theming obsolete when the Tron roller coaster opens at the Magic Kingdom in a few years. Ever since the retheme, people have speculated that the only reason Test Track looks the way it does was to cash in on the 2010 movie, which doesn't seem like too much of a stretch. And even if it isn't because of the new coaster, Epcot itself is set to be undergoing some major changes over the next couple of years, so I'd wager that some kind of revamp, or maybe even new attraction entirely, is definitely on the table right now. But we'll just have to wait and see. Well, there it is, guys. Pretty much all we've got on Test Track for now. Apologies if I was being a little too harsh on the new version back there. I just really missed the original. I still think that was one of the best attractions Epcot ever had. Even just the theming without the ride is still on my top 10 of all time. I don't know why, but no other Disney queue has even come close to Test Tracks for me. I just really love how detailed and strange it is. Maybe it's too much to ask for some of that old theming to come back, but they could totally do something small like restore the Cool Wash drink stand to its original design and make that into a little photo op. Maybe even get those old test dummies out every once in a while, you know? Just a little homage to the old ride. Please guys, I'm begging you, don't let my Test Track die like this. Either way, that still wraps up this episode of Keep Epcot Weird. And good news, I think I know just the guys to play us out this time. Hit it, fellas!
On the big highway of life, there's only one safe place for kids. Backseat, baby. The front seat's not the place to drop out. Don't want that big old bag to pop out. Backseat, baby. Put that booties in the backseat. Backseat, baby. Have that kiss you never meet. I'm here to remind you to put them behind you. Backseat, baby. Wow, look at here. Backseat, baby. You stay alive even when I drive.
I'm guessing in here they would spray the car with some kind of an acid, corrosive liquid, something that would eat them. That couldn't be good.